Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Ducksy Gaming and a new video on the channel, finally giving my review and thoughts on the early access to Path of Exile 2, what I really like and what I would like to see improved and how. So we'll start off just with general sound effects, skill effects, music. I think they all work really well. Really detailed, things like ice explosions when you freeze and shatter an enemy look amazing. Loads of different little things that they've added in and obviously spent a lot of time on work really well. And overall, the environments, the atmosphere, the music, the sound, animations and everything, I think are top draw. Way better, obviously, than PoE 1, because that's like 10 years old now. And I don't really have a bad word to say about any of that. I guess if I had one feedback point, it would probably be that the music isn't quite as atmospheric as the zones in PoE 1. And I couldn't get the Act 1 loot lady, whatever her name is, to play a song. You click to play a song and then it just was silence. I don't know if that's the same for everyone else. But I was really looking forward to hearing the song that they teased in the YouTube video. So I went to town, asked her to play the song. Maybe I didn't give her enough money, but it was just radio silence. In terms of graphically, the armor that you equip now just looks good. It looks like it suits the character compared to Path of Exile 1, when you're basically wearing what I'm wearing. If you're a duelist, you've got a red top on, you've got some trousers on. You look like someone who's going out for dinner in medieval times, but no, you're fighting in this barren, exiled land. Now your monk looks like a monk, your warrior looks like a warrior, and you don't feel as inclined to buy MTX because your character just looks dreadful. Storyline so far, really good. Enjoying it, easy to follow, not too much. And I think compared to Path of Exile 1, which does have a great story as well, but it's hidden beyond lots of things you've got to click on that most of the time you don't. But overall, enjoying it and definitely looking forward to Acts 4, 5, and 6 when they come out. In terms of controls, I'll quickly touch on those. WASD definitely feels better than click to move, but I think both of them feel like there's something a little bit off about them. I can't quite pinpoint it. So at the moment, I'm just using controller. I'm finding that the best way to play the game in combat. It's just the fact that managing your inventory and everything is a pain. So it'd be really nice if you could seamlessly switch between the two rather than have to go back to the login menu, but that's kind of a very small gripe. So if we move on to the core stuff, the gameplay, I'm going to split it up into two sections. We're going to do the campaign, then we're going to do the end game. So the biggest plus point for me of the campaign, and I'm sure for most people, are the bosses. They are really well designed, lots of fun, interesting and different mechanics. And for the most part, other than a couple of glitchy ones, they feel pretty fair. You know when you've died, there's probably something you can do about it the next time around to make sure that you don't experience the same death. There are a couple, like the Colossus boss, I find his hitboxes are really glitchy. I've seen people on console falling off the map and dying. Putting skills down like the Monk Bell was really hard on the Colossus because you basically have to go back to the middle of the platform to do it because it thinks you're trying to chuck it over the edge. So there are definitely some things that could be tweaked. And he was definitely a very frustrating boss. But overall, I think they're pretty fair. They're well designed and they are a lot of fun learning the mechanics. And they give you a good sense of achievement when you defeat them. The zones in general felt really nicely designed in terms of the themes, all of the different parts of scenery. I liked Act 1 the best, but I more like things in that kind of theme. Act 2 was decent. Act 3, I really didn't like the vibe of Act 3, and there's too many jungles where you get stuck behind trees and stuff. And I just didn't get the vibe of that act. Like, I really liked the idea of it with the Val, but I just, didn't love that zone as much, but that's probably more of a personal thing. But I am looking forward to seeing what Acts 4, 5, and 6 bring, because it looks like they're all in a very different, unique environment. General combat feels really good. Once you get most of your skills unlocked, I don't think there's a time where you don't feel like you can deal with any specific situations. And it did feel like you could react to stuff happening rather than in other ARPGs and Path of Exile, you just spam a button, and then if everything doesn't die, you might look at what mod an enemy has to what you might need to do to kill it. But overall, it did feel good. The pacing felt good. The speed of the enemies felt in line. It just feels really good in general. But that is once you get the character up to speed, which I'm going to touch on when I come to my negative points. Now, although the zones felt nicely designed, some of them are just way too big. It feels like such a chore sometimes when you've got to find an item in a zone you've already explored 99% of, and it's going to take you X amount of time to get back. Now, they have added the ability to teleport from checkpoints, but I still don't think it masks the fact that some of the zones are just needlessly big with not a lot in them. If they were packed full of enemies, that'd be fine. You might get some drops, you might get some XP, but you might run around for 25 seconds without seeing any monsters. And it's just it's not fun. It's not really a game. It's a walking simulator where nothing is getting simulated. And then I do feel, which might be why I didn't like the Vial Zone as much, is there's a lot of objects that get in the way, but they don't necessarily look like they're going to get in your way. Like there'll be little puddles on the ground, there'll be a little bush, that unless you've got your big mini map up, which sort of ruins your immersion, you're walking into it and you're trying to understand why you can't get close to this enemy. You look at a mini map and there's probably something the size of a polo mint that is just inaccessible ground and you've got to walk around it. Stuff like that felt quite bad, but it's not a deal breaker, and I'd rather they spent time fixing other stuff that I think is a bigger problem rather than things like that. And so they were my only real gripes about the gameplay, the maps, that kind of thing. Overall, I just think everything worked really well. Where I think it fell down, especially at launch, which has been fixed a little bit now, is itemization and rewards, because there are basically none. I remember Jonathan Rogers saying, oh, these exalts, you're going to be dropping a load of them, get used to crafting in the campaign. And I did have 2 drop in my first 10 minutes. And I was like, great, we can start using these. So I slammed them on like my first item. And then I didn't see another one until Act 3. And then I saw 2 in Cruel. And that felt horrendous, because your only source of gear early on is either get a lucky drop, which I didn't get, or hope the vendors sell something good, which they didn't. So I went through Act 2, 3, Cruel 1 and Cruel 2 with getting very few upgrades. So by the time I got there, I hardly had any resist, I hardly had any damage. I was getting absolutely smashed left, right and centre. Whereas someone who just got lucky and maybe got a staff to drop and one item that gave them a bit of resist is absolutely blitzing through the campaign. And it just felt that the reliance on RNG was way too much. So what I'd like to see them do is introduce guaranteed rewards to bosses. So if you go and do a side boss, that boss will drop a weapon and he'll have an indicator to show that it will drop a weapon. Not only that, whatever weapon you're using, that's the one he'll drop. There'll be another boss that might have a helmet as an indicator, which means he'll drop a rare helmet. And then if you're wearing an armor and evasion helmet, you get an armor and evasion helmet drop. Not only does this help you gear your character, but it stops you getting stuck. The problem I had towards the end of Cruel difficulty is I genuinely was hard stuck in that there's no way I can grind lower tier zones because they're not going to drop increased skill gem levels. I've just got to hope and pray they drop a staff that has stats that I can use, or every white one I pick up and use my currencies on them, which I was doing. This gives you an option to actually gear up. So you can say, right, I'm stuck on this bit and I know it's damage that I need to improve on. I can see that this boss in the act before is a guaranteed weapon boss. So I'm going to go and I'm actually going to farm that boss and kill him a few times, get a better weapon, then have a better time going forwards. I just think adding something simple like that in solves all of the itemization problems. And then the last thing I think I really didn't like was class balance. So I've played both a ranger and a monk, and the leveling between the two is night and day. Ranger feels smooth, probably slightly overpowered. The only 2 skills that you need in the game you get in the first 5 or 10 minutes, which is lightning rod and lightning arrow. And in general, you can stay at range, play safe, you get evasion. The Act 1 was an absolute breeze. There wasn't any point where I died or felt like I was going to die or felt like anything was unfair. When I go back to my monk, where the skills you get in the first, well, I'd say the first act until you kill the executioner, I think, are dreadful. You get a range ability, which is the ice ability, which Glacial Cascade, which, unless you time it so that it hits the edge of an enemy, does no damage. You've got some good stuff for clearing. You've got your power charges, you've got your staggering palm, I think it's called, and then you've got your falling thunder to empower. But on bosses, they're no help. So what you end up doing is praying that minions turn up on a boss. You can get them to culling range, get your power charges, and actually do damage. So it's 2 things that tell me that monk is just so undertuned for early game in terms of what skills it's got. The first is everyone's recommending you level as a lightning arrow in your bow, even though we don't get access to bow nodes because quarterstaff skills are that bad. The second is that your best ability, until you get Ice Strike or Tempest Flurry, I think it's called, is your default attack. That does more damage, more consistent damage, and is quicker to strike than any of the other skills. Now, yes, you can use Glacial Cascade if you aim well and the target doesn't move. If it moves and it doesn't hit that end chain, it does very little damage. Now, I'm sure there's some god gamers out there that are like, oh, it's easy, I always get my Glacial Cascade to hit. But in general, I want to play melee as a monk. I don't get any melee options at all until we get Ice Strike unlocked. So I would like to see them balance the skills a little bit better early game. And another thing that sort of goes along with kind of your accessibility to skills and being able to deal with different situations, There were areas in Act 1 where the monster composition just felt heavily unfair against melee. The zone after you kill the Executioner is a prime example. I think that's the zone where you will get Ice Strike. It's about that level. But that zone, there's 2 enemies. There is one weird little goblin type bloaty monster that blows up when you kill him and leaves like a corrupting blood, fizz over time degen on the ground. And there's another that's like a mage that just constantly fires ranged attacks at you. When you want to play melee, you basically have the option of not and using your Glacial Cascade to kill everything, which is boring, not fun, and I don't think what they intended. Or you go into melee, every time you kill an enemy, you have to dodge roll back out that pool, find another way around or wait for it to go, and all that time, there's enemies at the edge of the screen chucking loads of projectiles at you. I don't remember dying in that zone, but when I played through again with my Ranger, I remember thinking how awful this would be as Monk, and maybe because it was very early on and I was hyped to play the game, I didn't notice it. But I can imagine as melee, that zone is super, super frustrating. There are a few other zones as well where there's too many range monsters. I would say the worst zone in the game that I would actually, rather than them redesign it, just ditch is the Dreadnought. Visually, looks really cool. You're on this moving thing with very narrow bridges that go across. The enemies look really cool. But it was an absolute horrible zone to play through and actually made me quit and go to bed and then start again the next day. Because as a melee character, you have nothing in your arsenal to actually complete that zone without luck. For those that haven't played it, it's a zone where you go along these bridges, you go to platforms, and you basically work your way along this very narrow Dreadnought. But there are enemies that can kill you before you can even get to them. So you could be on a bridge at the bottom of the zone. Enemies are on a bridge at the top, which you've still got to get 2 walkways to get to. And they're all just firing range attacks at you. And you're on a tiny little narrow bridge, having to fight melee enemies that again are dropping degens on the ground. It's just a really, really, really badly designed zone. And I don't think there's much they can do to fix it unless they make every monster in that zone melee. Because of the way that zone is constructed, you're constantly going to get off-screened. If you're a ranger, it's great. You can aim your lightning arrow up at these monsters and kill them. But as, you know, a monk or a warrior, you literally can't do anything. Your palm skills can't go across the gaps. Your range attacks can't go across the gaps. So unless you're obliterating the enemies close to you and moving onto those ranged enemies, it just feels like artificial difficulty and being punished for playing a melee character. So I'd honestly like to see them totally do away with that zone. It just doesn't fit in the game, in my opinion. But that's kind of it for the campaign. I think overall it's more positives than negatives. The game is a ton of fun. Once you get past the early issues with some of the class balancing, the game feels fair. Itemization I would like to see improved and get some guaranteed drops. But apart from that, ton of fun. And I don't think there's really much they have to do. Just make 4, 5, and 6 in a similar vein. Make a couple of tweaks, and it's an absolutely awesome campaign. So before I go into endgame, let's talk about trials. I'm not going to spend long on these because I have the same view as everyone else. They don't belong as an ascendancy path. They're absolutely not fun to play for the majority of the people, and they're overtuned. Maybe when 6 acts comes out, it's a bit better, but having to do a 9-round level 75 ultimatum to get your 3rd ascendancy point seems pretty crazy. Having to grind up and kill the trial master, for example, to get your 4th again just seems like too much. Lots of cool stuff might be locked behind these ascendancies, and I understand we need to earn our power, but if you gave us access to these ascendancies earlier on, new players are probably going to have more fun and get more engaged. So what I'd like to see, which I'm hoping happens, is when there's 6 acts, Act 2, 3, 4 and 5, or 5 and 6, you do your ascendancies. They're all a quest item. They're all repeatable if you fail it. If you're not strong enough, you come back later. I'd just like nothing to be locked behind these trials, especially at high difficulties. I would like, which is never going to happen, them to just do away with them completely and put them in endgame, and you just get your ascendancies as maybe a quest. You have to kill a certain boss, and then you get your 1st ascendancy. Then you kill a 2nd boss, or you go off and do a specific ascendancy quest that's in the game. That would feel good. But if they do want to stick with these trials, I'd like to see them made a little bit easier and friendlier for all like archetypes. And I'd like to see them all tied in with quests so that if you're good enough to complete them, by the time you get to maps, you've got all your ascendancies unlocked. And that's one less thing you have to worry about. Trials of the 2nd round chaos can then be a pure end game thing for people that actually like doing that content. So let's move on to endgame. And if I'm honest, it's pretty much a complete mess for the most part. I know this sounds harsh, but you can tell it's rushed and you can tell they didn't have long to work on it. And I know people would have screamed out for endgame, but now I think people will look back they'd probably rather have the full campaign and just one very small endgame system, because the campaign has been the most enjoyable part. The main problem with endgame for me is that it feels like all they've done is taken the kind of mapping environment system from Path of Exile 1, including the monsters and the modifiers, and just chucked them into Path of Exile 2 environments. It just doesn't work because of the skills and the way your character moves and attacks compared to PoE 1. The two things don't work together. So you've essentially got this slow character with no movement ability against these lightning rapid monsters with lots of mods that belong only in PoE 1, but for some reason are in PoE 2. And overall, it just doesn't feel like it's part of Path of Exile 2. It feels like you get through Path of Exile 2, you get to endgame, and then you've got this weird hybrid endgame system of the bad bits of Path of Exile 1 and the bad bits of Path of Exile 2. It's not to say there's not enjoyable bits, which I'm going to come on to, but I think overall, you can tell it's early access and you can tell it's rushed, and I hope this is not what the endgame system is going to be like, because it's not going to hold people's attention for that long, because not only is there not much to do, it just doesn't feel that it fits properly. So let's talk about endgame systems. There are a few of them as mentioned in the reveal, but they just feel that they're a really, really small part of endgame, and they only really unlock once you've cleared your Atlas. So that there isn't really anything to do in the game other than grind your map tiers and get them completed. Then once you're powerful enough to farm league mechanics in T15s, then you can start thinking about those mechanics. If we take Breach and Simulacrum, or Breach and Delirium as an example, you don't drop splinters at all until you get to red maps, and even then, the drops are very, very pitiful. It's kind of magnified and shows by the fact that Simulacrums are about 200 exalts, because you drop about 2 to 4 splinters a map if you're lucky, and that's if you're T15s and you get to 4 or 5 levels of rewards. The way they sold the end game with the different tiers of difficulty is that maybe by the time you get to your mid-tier maps, you've collected enough for a Simulacrum and you can go and do level 1 difficulty, which is maybe item level 75. Then when you boost that up, you can then do your level 2 when you get to like tier 13s and 14s, and then the next two are more end game. But it's not. They're basically, these things don't start until you're at end game, your character's fully fleshed out, and you've farmed an absolute age to get them. What you're essentially left with is strong boxes, which don't drop anything, they take forever to open. Essences, which are way, way too few in terms of the greater essences. And then you've got Ritual, which is very, very difficult, and the rewards for the most part are junk. And then you've got Shrines, which honestly, for the most part, I'd rather they weren't in the maps, because the buffs aren't great and the monsters are much more difficult to kill. So I just think everything is imbalanced at the moment. So what I'd like to see is splinters to drop at all map tiers, but obviously the higher map tiers drop more so that you're not incentivized to farm like tier 1 maps, to give you an opportunity to engage in these endgame systems earlier. Make the base level of Breach and base level of Simulacrum equivalent to like a mid-tier map, and let people go learn what these mechanics are about, see if it's going to be something they want to invest further into farming. Then it gives you endgame options, but at the moment it really doesn't feel like there are 8 endgame systems. It feels like there's one, which is the Atlas. In terms of rewards and drops, I actually think they're okay. I'd like to see bosses in a few more maps, but they did say the reason they aren't is because they want to be able to put loot behind them. And I'd say I'm dropping a few exalts every map if I'm not juicing, and I think that's fine. If you get into maps on day 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, exalts are pretty worthwhile compared to what they are now. So if you can farm 10 or 20 exalts, that's going to get you gear to progress in your map system. SSF, I'm not even going to touch on, because I think the crafting system is nowhere near good enough to be able to do SSF, but I'm not going to touch on crafting because I'm hoping this is something that they're going to look at a lot in depth. Everyone knows it's bad. It's basically RNG, slam stuff on. Did it work? No, I'll sell it to a vendor, but I might touch on that in a different video, but there's too much to cover in terms of what I think they should do to fit it into this video. But I do feel that with the trade system, with a little bit of currency, you can get res capped or closer to res capped. You can get a bit more damage. You can get a bit more life. And there is a nice progression through the map tiers. And in general, even though the maps are too big, the layouts are a bit naff, I did enjoy the combat in there if they just toned down some of the enemy rushing and enemy on death effects. I just thought I need to get that gameplay more like PoE 2. So let's move on to the one death thing. I'm actually okay with this in maps because I don't actually feel in general that the enemies do a ton of damage. There's just some outliers such as shotgunning projectiles or on-death explosions that you can't see that do make it feel a little bit cheap. But I think once you get geared, you don't die in maps. I've died once in 2 days and that was to an on-death explosion, and I'm running T15 maps with extra rare modifiers and things like that. I like the one death thing because it almost tells you if you die 6 times in a row, your character's not ready for this, so you need to farm lower content, look at what currency you've got, get some exchange, get some better gear, have a look at your character, review it, because I think without it, you might fall through on a character that is bad, and you don't necessarily know it's bad because you're just scraping through your content on 6 portals. But what this makes you do is address your character and say, right, there is something wrong. Let me go on some forums and see if people are doing something different. Let me see if there's a guide or tips. You don't have to go and follow a guide letter for letter, but you're just blinkered if you're not going to look at what other people are doing because, oh, I want to make my own build. No one makes their own build. People will have a build in mind. Bits won't work. They'll go and see what other people are doing. They'll borrow bits from there. Then a few days later, they'll see someone else doing something different. All these things do merge into a build that you will call your own, but they're not something you've 100% theory crafted from scratch. So I do like the one death thing in maps. Where I don't like them is in the endgame content. Especially because you have to farm an absolute ton of this game to even get access to that endgame content. I haven't done it and I haven't looked at things because I want to go in blind, but I almost don't want to go in blind because I know there's going to be a mechanic that comes up that's new that I don't know what I'm doing, and unless you do it perfectly, you're dead. And then that's basically weeks of grinding gone from one portal. Whereas if they maybe gave you 3, I can know from the first one, right, I have an idea what that mechanic does now. I'll go in and make sure this is how I tackle that part. Or give us 6 portals, but just give us no loot if we die once. Then at least we've got options to learn the fight, and would be a nice kind of workaround. The other thing you could do in maps with the no death thing is, why don't you get double the loot drop if you don't die? If you do die, then the boss drops less loot each time you die. I think that's fine because you can still get the map clear. You'll get some loot. You'll be able to pick up loot that you may have dropped on death. But overall, I don't mind the one portal thing in maps, but I do mind it for the more difficult content. There is issues still with map layout and monster composition in endgame, and I'm sure this was something they will hopefully fix, but I don't like procedurally generated maps. I'd rather they just be fixed for 2 reasons. One, they can ensure there's no stupid inaccessible areas of the map and that there's no choke points that are just unfair. Secondly, it gives you an idea of the layout of the map so you know how to best traverse that landscape. Just saying, well, this is a wood area with tons of paths, I'm just going to run, do the right wall strat, run all the way around. You miss a tiny little nook, you clear the map and realise there's a rare enemy the other side of the map. It really doesn't feel good at all, and it feels like they're almost lengthening endgame by doing it, and it's a deliberate choice, but it just, no one likes it. So I would like to see maps that are fixed, and I'd like to see choke points gone to an extent. It's no fun having to go through a tiny narrow thing where you can't actually get your palm strike through, for example, because there's not enough room, where your arrow collides with the terrain, and you can see a rare and 30 magic monsters waiting behind there to gank you as soon as you walk through. It feels like Heist all over again, where you open a door, you're sitting there hoping and praying that these 50 monsters behind it aren't going to kill you before you kill them. And there's lots of zones like that where there's doors you got to open. Luckily, it's a bit glitched if you're a projectile build and you can shoot through walls, but for melee, you can't do that. So I really would like to see them do away with tiny choke points and do away with the different tiers of scenery. So rather than have one bit that's 30 meters in the air and one that's down, if you do that, the enemies can't shoot you from the one that's 30 meters up. There's a few different maps, and there's even a couple of indoor ones where you've got like 2 levels of terrain. You can't attack the enemies in the one above or get there because you've got to walk all the way around a long corridor, but they could definitely shoot you and kill you and chuck bombs at you, and it just feels really cheap, and it's like a rubbish artificial way of increasing difficulty and the risk of death. So I'd like to see them do a lot of work on the general layouts of maps. I've already mentioned kind of the end game content, and that to me there isn't any because it doesn't open up until you get right to the end. So let's move on to the Atlas and the skill tree. These are great in concept, but at the moment they're not implemented very well in my opinion. But like I say, it's early access. I'm not in any way scathing. I think it's a great start. Tons that they can work on, and they can get these 2 things nailed on, I think, with some changes. So the Atlas in general should be this ever-expanding thing, which it isn't. There are corners you get blocked. There's lots of places you can't go. But overall, you can go as far as you want if you find the little route through. The main issue I have with the Atlas is the RNG of unlocking citadels. I have done hundreds of maps. I've played hours every day at endgame. I've not found one citadel, and I've done nothing but go in different directions. Now, whether my Atlas is bugged, I don't know, but yeah, not seen one. The other is towers. Towers just break up the gameplay. They feel really thrown in and just feel that they shouldn't be there. I get the idea of them and that you can put things in them to make content appear in your maps and add some different modifiers, but to actually go through them is a chore. There's hardly any enemies. You end up putting a tier 1 map in, or whatever a low tier is you don't care about, just running to the end, clicking the button to activate the tower, and that's it. So I'd either like to see them do away with them completely and you just click the button and the tower activates, or they put some mechanics in there. Maybe there's 3 guaranteed essences in a tower, or there is a guaranteed rare that will drop high value currency, just something that makes you incentivized to do it. So at the moment it's just put in a low tier map, unlock the tower, done. And it just feels like something you have to do. And it almost feels the same with some maps sometimes, where you might put in your tablets into the watchtowers because you want more delirium. And then you've got this map in between a delirium and a boss map that's just a normal map. I will put a T15 in and run it, but most people might just go, do you know what? All I need to do is kill rares in this map, which is all I'm going in for. I'm going to put in a tier 1 map to get this one out of the way. Just the balance doesn't feel right. I think there's ways to fix it. Like I said, I don't think towers should be a map. You should just press a button and the tower activates. Tablets, I think, could be better. I think the buffs could be better on them and they could drop a bit more often. But I think the way they could probably fix this is a better Atlas tree. Now, I understand why they've done it. Be conservative, you can always add to it, but if they give us the world and then have to take it away, people will riot. But there's really nothing meaningful in that Atlas tree. You could run without it and you're not going to really feel any difference in your gameplay. What I really like to see them expand on is, I'm fine with just having 30 points, but I would really like to see them give you the ability to specialize fully in something. If I wanted to do essences, for example, I can spend all my 30 points on that tree in essences. That maybe gives me an essence every map, gives me a chance to have more imprisoned monsters, gives me a percentage chance to get greater essences. Just things that allow me to concentrate on the mechanic that I want to focus on. If I want to do strong boxes, similar to the ones in PoE1, make it corrupted, make it so that 2 or 3 spawn in a map, make it so that they open quicker, just things to change the actual gameplay. Because I just find at the minute it is just getting through all your map tiers and then deciding if you really want to do 100 delirium maps to try and get enough splinters to do simulacrum. There's probably much more I haven't covered, but I think they're most of my feedback items. Now, I know this video might have sounded like a long list of criticisms, but it's not really. I just want to give constructive feedback and say what I think I enjoyed as a player and what I didn't, and how I think things could be made better. Now, they obviously have their philosophies of things that they're never going to change. So some of the stuff I'm wanting to happen is probably never going to happen, but I think some of the things are fairly reasonable. I'm really looking forward to seeing what this game is like when we've got 6 acts, we've got all the classes, we've got the ascendancies that we don't have at the moment. We've probably got a revised passive tree, revised endgame. I think there's a ton of potential, and if this game is in early access for a year, I do think that's going to be amazing when it launches. So if I was to summarize 3 things from the campaign and 3 things from endgame that I would like to see. In the campaign, I'd certainly like to see smaller zones in some areas. It did feel a bit of a chore running around. I'd like to see better class balance early on for some. I think there are some classes that are just way, way better at the early game than others. And I think there's things I could do to make that better, such as introducing skills early, giving some classes a bit more mobility. There's a few things I think that could be done. And lastly, ascendancy is not tied to these trials anymore, or they're made quite a bit easier and put all into the campaign. But I would rather they just be tied to specific quests. If we move on to endgame, I would like more portals on boss fights for sure. I think 1 is just way, way too punishing considering the time and expense that's needed to enter that content. I'd like to see much more customization on the Atlas tree. It is very, very bland and vanilla, I would say, and there's just so much more that can be done with that. And then finally, bring the gameplay in line with the campaign gameplay rather than having this strange, what feels like hybrid of Path of Exile 1 and 2. Have it more representative of the gameplay in the campaign. Maybe slow monsters down a little bit or speed us up to catch up. Do something so that it just feels like it fits. That's kind of it for the video. I know it's been a bit of a long one, but I wanted to bring this video out once I'd had a good chunk of time playing the game, and I kind of understood what I really liked and what I didn't like too much, and wanted to give them a chance to make what I expected them to do, which is a balance patch. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the video what you liked, what you disliked, what you'd like to see changed, if anything. Thank you very much for watching. Hope everyone has a good holiday. Take care and see you in the next one.